ما زلنا مع باحثينا المتميزين، وهذه المرة ينضم إلينا من جامعة قرطبة الوطنية في الأرجنتين، والذي يسعى للحصول على درجة الدكتوراه في العلوم الجيولوجية. ينصب اهتمامه البحثي على دراسة الأرض والصخور والتربة المتجمدة والعلوم الجيولوجية. فلنرحب بالأستاذ مارتين مندوزا.
Why research on water resources? This is what is happening today in the world. More than 2 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water, and roughly half of the world's population is facing severe water scarcity for at least part of the year. And these numbers are expected to increase in the coming decades, forced by climate change and population growth. The region where I live, the Central Andes of Argentina, is one of the regions that are facing water scarcity as well, because of the reduction of the seasonal snow cover. To study the sources of water that feed the rivers, I had to go to the high mountains, where I found the most beautiful landscapes I've ever seen. I was completely caught by its beauty. While I was there, I started thinking, what are these landforms? Where does the water come from? You see, the water supply in the Andes depends heavily on snow and glacial melting during the dry season, with potential contributions from seasonally frozen ground. My research focused in rock glaciers, which are large bodies of rocks and sediments with ground ice that slowly move down on a slope. These landforms are very common in the Andes, and despite numerous studies on this subject, there are still open questions and there are differing opinions about the contribution of rock glaciers to the mountain rivers. For this reason, I decided to investigate them further. Working in the high mountains taught me that this place has not only its beauties, but also its dangers. In just one day, I hurt my knee, I fell into a freezing pond, and then I was near to be struck by a thunderbolt. But fortunately, I survived. All these adventures made me even more interested in carrying on my research. And ironically, the biggest problems that I had to face were not in the mountains, but I found them when I came back to the city. First, I had to deal with lack of funding. You see, I started working with a tight budget that was also delayed for years due to administrative problems. Sometimes I had to use my own savings just to afford the equipment I needed for my research. And that's not all. I felt even more stressed when I had to postpone many of the chemical analyses that I needed for years because I didn't have the money to pay for them. And maybe the biggest challenge that I faced was when I realized that I wouldn't reach some of my initial objectives. You see, at first, I wanted to model chemical processes in rock glaciers with acid drainage, but getting water samples was a huge challenge in my study area. The pathway of water in rock glaciers is mainly underground, so there were just a few sites to take water samples. I did a few trials to simulate the composition of groundwater from sediment samples, but I wasn't getting good results. By then, I didn't have the time or money to carry out more trials, so I got stuck. All these problems led me to deal with an anxiety crisis when I had to start writing my thesis. I started having persistent and distressing thoughts. I had some sleeping problems, so I was weak and tired. When I thought of my thesis, I felt insecure and overwhelmed. After working for 5 years, I still had unfinished parts of my research. But here is the thing. When you face challenges, you can't let them defeat you. You have to find the strength to keep going, and that's what I did. So one day, I managed to overcome these problems. First, I started therapy to help me manage my anxiety And I have to say that it worked. Getting my worries out and training new ways of looking at problems and myself helped me to lower my anxiety and settle my ideas. Soon, I made a schedule to organize my writing. And then I started working on my thesis little by little. I mean, if you have a big problem, the best way to face it is to cut it into small pieces. To solve the problem of my unreached objectives, I decided to take advantage of the strongest parts of my research. This was a very important decision because during the pandemic, I had been working with a colleague on a dataset that was not included in my original plan. One day, I was talking with her and she said to me, "Hey Martin, why don't you put this in your thesis?" Well, I did it, and this was one of the most important goals in my PhD. I had a thermal and hydrological model in the active layer of a rock glacier. On the other hand, there were parts in my thesis in which I couldn't reach numerical models as I wanted at first. Instead of that, I just proposed conceptual models based in the results that I got. While I was writing my thesis in the last year, I finally received the funding that I was waiting for, so I could finally analyze some of my samples. In this way, I managed to write down my thesis in 7 months of deep work and concentration. Now, I am happy to tell you that my manuscript has already been sent to my thesis committee, so let's celebrate! Now, if I could travel on time and talk to myself when I started my PhD, this is the piece of advice that I would give me. Make your planning flexible. In my personal experience, and also in many cases that I have observed, there are many factors that you might not know when you are planning a doctoral thesis. You see, you start from a hypothesis, you propose a methodology, and you try to develop your research as you planned. However, there are situations in which, for whatever reason, you cannot do some of the planned activities, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. You can take advantage of new ideas, and you must be able to adapt your research. So keep in mind that the value of a doctoral thesis is not the amount of data you have collected, not even how close you are to your from your original plan, but instead of that, the main challenge lies in your capacity to analyze information, interpret the results, and connect them in an original way. So, be confident in each step you take, and try to write down small pieces of your thesis from the beginning. This is a piece of advice that many of you can take if you want. Start writing now. So, even though it was a hard process in which I spent 6 years of my life, I think if I had to choose, I would do it again. All the experience helped me to grow. I have learned many lessons and I got a little wiser. I feel as if I reached the top of the mountain. So, if I could do it, you can do it too.